My name is Anna Ward, and at 34 I thought I knew what professional security felt like. I had walked into Luxe Tech that morning feeling confident, a carefully selected bouquet of lilies and hydrangeas in my hands to welcome our new CEO. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to new opportunities, not the career guillotine waiting for me. I smoothed my blazer, practiced my greeting, and stepped into the boardroom with a smile. But instead of a handshake, he looked right through me with cold, calculating eyes. "Anna Ward, your time is over," he said flatly. The bouquet trembled in my suddenly unsteady hands. If you've ever had the ground pulled from beneath you, give this video a thumbs up and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. My journey at Luxe Tech began 10 years ago when I joined as a junior marketing associate fresh out of my MBA program. Back then, the company was still finding its footing in the tech industry, occupying just 2 floors of a nondescript building in downtown Seattle. What we lacked in grandeur, we made up for in vision and determination. I fell in love with the company's mission to create accessible technology that actually improved people's lives instead of just complicating them. In those early days, I worked directly under Sandra Michaels, the marketing director who became my mentor. She recognized something in me that I hadn't fully seen in myself yet. "Anna," she told me during my first performance review, "you have an intuitive understanding of not just what people want, but what they'll want tomorrow. That's rare." Coming from Sandra, those words meant everything. I threw myself into every project, often staying late to perfect campaign strategies or analyze market research data. Within 3 years, I was promoted to senior marketing manager, and when Sandra left for a competitor 4 years later, the previous CEO, Marcus Richardson, didn't hesitate to promote me to marketing director. "You've earned this," Marcus said, as he handed me the official letter. "Your Luminous campaign single-handedly increased our market share by 12%. The board unanimously approved your promotion." The Luminous campaign had been my baby. While others wanted to position our new smart home system as a luxury item, I pushed for marketing it as an essential tool for modern families. The strategy worked brilliantly, expanding our customer base beyond the tech enthusiasts to everyday households. Under my direction, the marketing department grew from 7 people to 23. We became known throughout the industry for innovative campaigns that actually connected with ordinary consumers. During my tenure, company revenue tripled, and much of that growth was attributed to successful marketing positioning. My closest allies at Luxe Tech were Diane Parker, the Human Resources Director, and James Hoffman, the Finance Director. The 3 of us had risen through the ranks together and formed an unofficial brain trust that Marcus often consulted for major decisions. The 3 musketeers, Marcus would joke when he found us huddled in the conference room brainstorming solutions to company challenges. Diane was the people person who could read a room better than anyone I'd ever met. James was our numbers guy, brilliant with financial projections and budget allocations. Together, we balanced each other perfectly and had created a company culture that valued both innovation and employee well-being. 3 months ago, Marcus announced his retirement. At 65, he wanted to spend more time with his grandchildren and finally write that novel he'd been talking about for years. "I've given Luxe Tech 15 years of my life," he told us at his retirement announcement. "I'm proud of what we've built together, but it's time for new leadership to take us to the next level." What followed was weeks of speculation about his successor. The board remained unusually tight-lipped about the selection process. Rumors circulated about potential internal candidates, with many of us hoping James might get the nod. "Not interested," James told me over lunch when I broached the subject. "I'm a finance guy, not a visionary. Besides, something strange is happening with this selection process. The board isn't following the usual protocols." His words should have been my first warning, but I was too focused on preparing my department for the transition to pay proper attention to the red flags. When they finally announced Richard Bennett as the new CEO, the name sent immediate ripples through the industry. Richard had a reputation as a ruthless executive from Vertex Technologies, our main competitor. He was known for aggressive cost-cutting measures and what industry insiders euphemistically called personnel optimization. "He cleans house," Diane translated bluntly when we gathered in her office after the announcement. "Every company he's joined, he's fired at least 30% of the existing staff within the first quarter." "That won't happen here," I argued. "Our departments are running efficiently. The company is profitable. There's no reason for dramatic changes." Just be prepared, Diane warned, her expression grave. Update your resume just in case. I dismissed her concerns. My department's performance metrics were exceptional. Our last campaign had generated $42 million in new business. My team was lean and effective. I had nothing to worry about. At least that's what I told myself. The week before Richard's arrival, the atmosphere in the office changed subtly. Board members who usually stopped by my office to chat suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Ralph Turner, who had always been my advocate on the board, couldn't seem to make eye contact during our budget review meeting. Is everything okay, Ralph? I asked as he hurriedly gathered his papers. Fine, he muttered. Just busy with the transition. Big changes coming, you know. All good things. He practically ran from the room, leaving me with a growing sense of unease. Still, I was determined to be professional. Whatever Richard's reputation, I would welcome him appropriately and demonstrate the value my department brought to Luxe Tech. I ordered special reports compiled showing our marketing ROI over the past 5 years. I prepared a presentation outlining our strategy for the coming year. I was ready to defend my team if necessary, but I genuinely believed that once Richard saw our results, he would recognize our value. How naive I was. 2 days before Richard's official start date, I received an unexpected call from Victoria Lancaster, one of the more reserved board members. I had always found Victoria difficult to read. Unlike other board members who were openly friendly or clearly adversarial, Victoria maintained a professional distance that bordered on aloofness. Anna, do you have time to meet this afternoon? She asked, her voice giving away nothing. Of course, I replied quickly, checking my calendar. Is 2 o'clock good for you? 2 is fine. Not in the office, though. Can you meet me at Westlake Coffee on 4th Avenue? The request for an off-site meeting immediately raised my concerns. Board members typically didn't arrange coffee dates with department heads unless something unusual was happening. May I ask what this is regarding? I ventured. It's better discussed in person, Victoria said shortly. I'll see you at 2. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Victoria was already there, seated at a corner table far from other patrons. She wore dark sunglasses despite the overcast Seattle day, and had positioned herself facing the wall rather than the entrance, another unusual choice. Thank you for coming, she said, removing the sunglasses after I sat down. Her eyes were tired with dark circles suggesting sleepless nights. Is everything all right, Victoria? I asked, increasingly concerned. She glanced around before leaning forward. I'll be direct, Anna. Changes are coming to Luxe Tech. Significant ones. Richard Bennett is not the CEO the company needs, but certain board members were insistent on bringing him in. Why are you telling me this? Because you're going to be directly affected. She took a deep breath. Richard intends to reshape the entire marketing department. He's already selected replacements from his previous company. His plans were not fully disclosed to all board members during the hiring process. The coffee I'd just sipped turned bitter in my mouth. That's not possible. My department consistently outperforms targets. We just had our best quarter ever. This isn't about performance, Victoria said grimly. It's about control. Richard wants his people in key positions, people who are loyal to him personally rather than to Luxe Tech. That's not just unethical, it borders on corporate malfeasance, I argued. The board can't possibly have approved this. Victoria's mouth tightened. Some board members are complicit. Others were kept in the dark about the extent of his plans. I've been wrestling with my conscience about this situation for weeks. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small USB drive, sliding it across the table with deliberate care. What's this? I asked, not touching it. Financial reports. The real ones, not the versions that have been presented at recent board meetings. She fixed me with an intense stare. There are discrepancies, Anna. Significant ones. The marketing budget has been misrepresented to make it appear more bloated than it actually island. That's impossible, I said automatically. I sign off on every expenditure. James would have caught any discrepancies in the financial reporting. James has been deliberately kept out of certain financial discussions. Check the files. Compare them to your records. I finally picked up the drive, slipping it into my pocket. Why are you giving this to me? Because I've worked with you for 7 years, and I know you're someone with integrity. Because what's happening isn't right. She stood up, gathering her things. Be careful, Anna. Trust very few people right now. That evening, after everyone else had left the office, I locked my door and inserted the USB drive into my computer. What I found shocked me to my core. The financial reports showed systematic manipulation of the marketing department's expenditures. Costs had been artificially inflated, and certain unsuccessful product launches had been blamed on marketing failures, when the reports clearly showed design flaws had been the actual issue. Most disturbing was a spreadsheet titled Restructuring Priorities that listed departments slated for comprehensive overhaul. Marketing was at the top, with my name specifically mentioned as priority replacement. I immediately called James from my personal phone, asking if he could meet me outside the office. We met at a small diner near his apartment where I carefully described what I'd found without revealing my source. I've suspected something was off with the reporting, James admitted, his usual confident demeanor subdued. Several times in recent months I've been excluded from executive financial discussions. When I questioned specific line items, I was told they were reviewed at special sessions I wasn't required to attend. Is this even legal? I asked. It's in a gray area, James replied. Technically, they've created misleading internal reports, but they haven't filed false information with the SEC yet. If they did, that would be securities fraud. What should I do? James considered carefully before responding. Make copies of everything. Secure them somewhere safe, not at home, and definitely not in the office. Be careful who you talk to about this. And Anna, he added, his expression grave, prepare yourself for tomorrow. If Richard's planning what I think he is, it won't be pretty. That night I made multiple copies of the files, storing them in various secure locations. I also printed key documents and placed them in a safety deposit box at my bank. Despite the evidence of what was clearly a coordinated plan to remove me, I still held out hope that I could speak with Richard directly, professional to professional. Surely, once he understood my department's actual performance and value, he would reconsider whatever he was planning. I decided I would welcome him professionally tomorrow as planned. I would bring the bouquet I had already ordered and try to establish a dialogue. If that failed, I had the evidence to defend myself and my team. I couldn't have known how quickly and brutally those hopes would be crushed. I woke up earlier than usual that morning, the gravity of the day ahead, making sleep impossible beyond 5 a.m. I spent extra time selecting my outfit, finally deciding on a navy blue suit that projected both authority and approachability. Professional but not intimidating was the balance I sought to strike. On my way to the office, I stopped at Bloom and Petal, the florist near our building, to pick up the bouquet I had ordered the previous week. The arrangement of white lilies and blue hydrangeas was elegant and welcoming, exactly the impression I wanted to create. Special occasion, asked the florist as she handed me the arrangement. New CEO starting today, I replied, trying to sound more cheerful than I felt. Well, these will certainly make a good first impression, she assured me. If only flowers had such power. The office was humming with nervous energy when I arrived. Staff from all departments had been instructed to gather in the lobby at 9 a.m. to greet Richard. I noticed several unfamiliar faces already present, standing together in a tight cluster near the reception desk. They were all immaculately dressed in what looked like designer suits, their postures radiating confidence bordering on arrogance. Richard's team, Diane whispered, suddenly appearing beside me. 5 of them arrived 20 minutes ago. They're already acting like they own the place. Do we know their roles? I asked quietly, adjusting my hold on the bouquet. Not officially, but based on what I've heard, they're all replacements for existing department heads. Her eyes reflected the warning she didn't need to verbalize. At precisely 9 o'clock, Richard Bennett strode through the main doors. He was taller than his photographs suggested, with sharp features and calculating eyes that seemed to evaluate and dismiss each person they landed on. He wore an immaculately tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Ralph Turner, the board chairman, immediately stepped forward with an effusive greeting, but Richard barely acknowledged him. Instead, his gaze swept over the assembled staff with cool detachment. Thank you all for this welcome, he said, his voice carrying easily without warmth. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we have significant work ahead of us. Key department heads, please join me in the main boardroom immediately. The rest of you, please return to your duties. No pleasantries. No attempt to connect with the team. Just immediate assertion of authority and control. As a department head, I stepped forward along with James, Diane, and the other directors. I extended my hand, offering the bouquet. Welcome to Luxe Tech, Mr. Bennett. I'm Anna Ward, Marketing Director. We're all looking forward to working with you. Richard glanced at the flowers, then at me, without taking either my hand or the bouquet. Boardroom. Now was all he said, before turning away. I stood there momentarily frozen, the bouquet still extended into empty air before lowering it and following the group toward the elevators. I caught James's eye, and he gave me a subtle headshake, his expression grim. The boardroom had been prepared for Richard's arrival, with fresh coffee pastries and company portfolios at each seat. Richard took his place at the head of the table with his 5 associates arranging themselves along one side, leaving the existing department heads to sit opposite them. The visual division couldn't have been clearer, us versus them. I'll keep this brief, Richard began once everyone was seated. Luxe Tech has underperformed its potential for years. The board has brought me in to implement necessary changes that will position us for aggressive growth and eventual public offering. He tapped on his tablet, and the main screen displayed a company organizational chart. This is the current structure, he said. And this, he tapped again, is where we need to be. The second chart showed a dramatically different organization with entire departments eliminated or merged, and many new positions that didn't currently exist. These changes will begin immediately, Richard continued. Some of you will be part of Luxe Tech's future, others will not. My heart pounded as I stared at the chart, seeing my entire marketing department reduced to a subsidiary function under a new brand experience division that would be headed by someone named Trent Wheeler, one of the stern-faced men sitting across from me. Let me be perfectly clear about expectations, Richard said, his gaze now moving deliberately around the table. I expect absolute loyalty, exceptional performance, and complete alignment with my vision. Anyone unable to provide these will not remain with the company. His eyes finally landed on me, and despite the warning signs, despite Victoria's information, I still wasn't prepared for what came next. Starting with marketing, he said coldly. Anna Ward, your time is over at Luxe Tech. Your department's performance has been substandard, your strategy's outdated, and your budget management questionable at best. You'll be replaced effective immediately by Trent Wheeler, who will completely restructure the marketing approach. The bouquet trembled visibly in my hands as I struggled to process his words. Around the table, my colleagues stared at their laps, or the wall, unwilling to make eye contact. Only James and Diane looked at me directly, shock evident in their expressions. That's not accurate, I finally managed to say, my voice thankfully steadier than I felt. Marketing has consistently exceeded performance metrics. Our last campaign increased revenue by 27% year over year. Your metrics were self-reported and artificially constructed to mask failures, Richard countered dismissively. This isn't a debate, Miss Ward. Security will escort you to clear your desk. You have until noon. This is completely unprofessional. Diane interjected, her HR training, apparently overriding her self-preservation instinct. Terminations should follow proper protocols, including performance documentation and opportunities for improvement. Richard turned his cold gaze to her. Your concerns are noted, Miss Parker, and perhaps indicative of why our HR department also requires new leadership. He gestured to a stern-looking woman beside him. Patricia Winters will be taking over human resources effective immediately. You can clean out your office together. The room fell silent. In the space of less than 5 minutes, Richard had fired both the marketing and HR directors without pretext or proper procedure. The message to everyone else was crystal clear. Oppose me at your peril. This meeting is adjourned for most of you, Richard said, standing. Mr. Wheeler and Miss Winters will remain with me to discuss transition. The rest of you have your assignments. I expect detailed department reports on my desk by end of day. As people began to rise, a security guard I didn't recognize appeared at the door. Miss Ward, Miss Parker, I'll escort you to your offices now. I stood on legs that felt disconnected from my body, still holding the ridiculous bouquet. In that moment, I considered throwing it directly at Richard's smug face, but professionalism kept me in check even if it hadn't extended the same courtesy to me. The walk back to my office was the longest of my professional life. Staff members quickly averted their eyes as I passed. Some looked genuinely distressed, others merely uncomfortable, and a few seemed almost satisfied, probably those who hoped to benefit from the new regime. Rachel, my administrative assistant, was in tears when I reached the marketing department. I just heard, she whispered. This is insane. What can I do? It's okay, Rachel, I said automatically, though nothing was remotely okay. Just continue as normal for now. Be professional. The security guard stood impassively by the door as I began to pack my personal items into a cardboard box provided by facilities management. 10 years of professional life reduced to a single container. My awards, my photos, a few personal mementos. I left behind all notes and files knowing they were company property, though I doubted Richard would find them useful given his apparent predetermined opinions. As I packed, various team members found excuses to walk past my office, some brave enough to whisper quick messages of support or shock. Most, however, maintained their distance, fear for their own positions, evident in their hurried steps and averted gazes. By 11:30, I had finished packing the meager box. The bouquet, now slightly wilted, still sat on my desk where I'd placed it upon entering. On impulse, I left it there, a silent statement for whoever would occupy my office next. The security guard escorted me to the elevator and then through the lobby. The final indignity was having to sign a visitor badge return form, as if I were already a stranger to the company I had helped build. As the glass doors closed behind me, I stood on the sidewalk, momentarily disoriented. It was a beautiful Seattle day, the sky unusually clear, people passing by on their normal routines. How strange that the world continued unchanged, while mine had just imploded. I made it to my car before the tears came. Not delicate, dignified tears, but ugly, racking sobs that left me gasping for breath. 10 years of dedication ended in 5 minutes of public humiliation. I had been blindsided despite the warnings, despite the evidence I'd seen just yesterday. Some part of me had still believed that professionalism and performance would matter. That part now lay shattered on the floor of the Luxe Tech boardroom along with my career. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I composed myself enough to drive home. The condo that had always represented my success now felt like a monument to my failure. I set the box down just inside the door and collapsed onto my couch, too emotionally exhausted to even change out of my carefully selected suit. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues and friends who had heard the news, but I couldn't bring myself to respond yet. What could I possibly say? That I had been publicly fired for fabricated reasons, that my entire professional identity had been stripped away in minutes, that I had seen it coming but had been powerless to prevent it. Instead, I lay there watching the afternoon sun track across my living room wall, trying to process what had happened and what it meant for my future. By evening, the shock had begun to transform into something else, something hotter and more potent. Anger. That evening stretched into a blur of conflicting emotions. I alternated between bouts of desperate sobbing and periods of numb disbelief. Around 8 p.m., my phone rang for what seemed like the 100th time, but this time it was Diane. I finally answered. They had security escort me out too, she said, without preamble, her voice tight with controlled fury. 10 years, Anna. 10 years of building that department from nothing, and they treated me like a criminal. I know, I replied, finding strange comfort in our shared humiliation. Did they at least give you a reason? Apparently my HR policies were too employee-centric and not aligned with the performance culture Richard wants to build. I could almost hear her rolling her eyes. Translation: I wouldn't have approved his slash-and-burn approach, so I had to go. Have you heard from anyone else inside? James texted. He's still there, but he thinks he's on borrowed time. Richard brought in some finance hotshot from Vertex who's shadowing everything James does. She paused. Anna, it's not just us. They fired 12 people today, all long-term employees in key positions. The number shocked me. 12, on his first day. All replaced with people Richard brought with him. 5 from Vertex, the rest from his network. It was a coordinated purge. I thought about Victoria's warning and the files she had given me. This was planned well before he arrived. Obviously, Diane agreed. No one fires a dozen executives on day one without a predetermined strategy. But why? The company is profitable. We were hitting our targets. I hesitated, unsure how much to share over the phone. We need to talk in person. Tomorrow morning. My place 9 a.m., she confirmed. I'll make coffee. We have planning to do. After hanging up, I forced myself to eat something, then spent several hours reviewing the files from Victoria's USB drive again, this time with more careful attention. What I found made my stomach churn. The financial records showed a pattern of misrepresentation going back at least 6 months. Marketing expenses had been systematically inflated on internal reports, creating the illusion that my department was spending far more than our actual budget. Meanwhile, losses from failed product launches had been shifted from R&D to marketing's accountability column, making it appear that good products had failed due to poor marketing rather than design issues. Most damning was a set of board meeting minutes from a special session that neither James nor Marcus had attended. The discussion explicitly outlined plans to restructure for maximum valuation ahead of a potential sale to Aerotech, a multinational conglomerate known for acquiring and dismantling smaller tech companies. The picture becoming clear was disturbing. Certain board members had worked with Richard to position Luxe Tech for sale, planning to eliminate anyone who might question the company's artificial valuation or oppose the acquisition. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Things worse than they seem. Watch financial news tomorrow. Be careful what you say. And to whom. We'll touch base when safe. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with implications and possibilities. By 6 a.m., I was already awake when my phone alerted me to a breaking news notification. Luxe Tech announces major restructuring. Stock jumps 12% on cost-cutting measures. The article quoted Richard Bennett praising the board's visionary decision to streamline operations and promising significant profitability improvements through necessary personnel adjustments. The market was responding enthusiastically to promises of reduced operational costs and aggressive growth strategies. No mention was made of the 12 experienced executives who had been summarily dismissed, nor of the fact that they had been replaced with Richard's hand-picked team. The article presented the purge as a brilliant strategic move rather than the calculated takeover it actually was. I was still seething over the article when my doorbell rang just after 8 a.m. Looking through the peephole, I was surprised to see Rachel, my administrative assistant, standing in the hallway glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" I asked, opening the door. "I can't stay long," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "They're monitoring everyone's comings and goings now." I said I had a doctor appointment. She pulled a manila envelope from her bag. "You need to see this. I found it on the printer this morning." Inside the envelope were emails that had apparently been printed accidentally and left in the office printer tray. The exchange was between Richard and Gerald Matthews, the board member who had been most enthusiastic about hiring him. "I need these specific individuals removed immediately," Richard had written with a list of names that included mine, Diane's, and 10 others. "They have detailed knowledge of actual financials and enough institutional history to question the adjusted valuations. Essential for clean transition and Aerotech acquisition." Matthews had replied. "Agreed on all targets. Severance packages minimal to none, using performance issues as justification. Legal exposure limited since we haven't yet filed adjusted reports with SEC. Primary target must be Ward, as her marketing oversight gives her visibility into actual product performance versus reported performance." I was listed as primary target. "There's more," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "They're having IT go through all our communications looking for evidence of corporate espionage. I think it's just an excuse to see if anyone saved records that could contradict their narrative." "Does anyone else know about this?" I asked carefully, returning the emails to the envelope. "A few people suspect something's not right, but most are just terrified of losing their jobs." She checked her watch. "I need to get back. What are you going to do, Anna?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But thank you for bringing this to me. It's definitely important." After Rachel left, I immediately scanned the documents and added them to my growing file of evidence. Then I headed to Diane's apartment, arriving a few minutes before our scheduled meeting time. "Did you see the news?" she asked as she opened the door. "I did. And I have more." I showed her Rachel's documents and explained what I'd found in Victoria's files. Diane's face grew increasingly grim as she processed the information. "This is securities fraud in the making," she said finally. "They're artificially inflating the company's value for acquisition." "We need to talk to James," I said. He'll know exactly which financial regulations they're violating. And Victoria Diane added, she clearly knows more than she's shared so far. We spent the morning developing a preliminary plan. While we were still discussing options, my phone rang with an unknown number. Anna Ward, an unfamiliar voice asked when I answered. Yes, who's this? Michael Torres, business reporter for the Seattle Times. I'm working on a story about the changes at Luxe Tech and was hoping to get your perspective as the former marketing director. My heart raced. How did you get my number, Mr. Torres? That's not important. What's important is that I'm hearing rumors about financial irregularities preceding the management changes. Care to comment? I met Diane's wide eyes across the table. Someone was already leaking information to the press. I'm afraid I can't discuss my former employer at this time, I said carefully. Understood, Torres replied. But if you change your mind, people deserve to know what's happening at one of Seattle's fastest-growing companies, especially if there's anything questionable occurring. After he hung up, Diane and I sat in silence for a moment. We need to move faster, she finally said. If reporters are already sniffing around Richard and the board will be working to cover their tracks. I agree, I said. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just run to the press with accusations. We need more concrete evidence and a solid strategy. What had begun as a personal professional catastrophe was quickly evolving into something much larger. This wasn't just about my career or even about 12 executives losing their jobs. It was about corporate fraud that could potentially impact hundreds of employees and shareholders. The anger that had been simmering since yesterday now crystallized into determination. Richard Bennett had fired me with the bouquet still trembling in my hands. He had humiliated me in front of my colleagues and dismissed a decade of my professional accomplishments. But he had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. By noon, Diane and I had outlined a preliminary strategy. Our first priority was establishing secure communications with potential allies. We purchased prepaid phones for emergency contact and set up encrypted email accounts using a VPN service. Corporate espionage accusations meant our regular devices might be compromised or monitored. We need to be methodical, I insisted as Diane paced her living room. Emotional responses will only undermine our credibility. Agreed, she said. First step is confirming exactly what we're dealing with legally. That means we need James. James agreed to meet us after work at a small restaurant in Bellevue, far from the Luxe Tech offices. He arrived looking exhausted, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. They've got watchdogs everywhere, he explained, sliding into our booth. My new deputy director follows me everywhere, including to the bathroom. I had to say I was meeting my brother for dinner. How bad is it? I asked. James ran a hand through his hair. Worse than we thought. They're preparing modified financial statements that substantially overstate company value. R&D failures have been reclassified as strategic investments. Operational costs have been artificially reduced by deferring necessary infrastructure upgrades. They're painting a picture of a company worth at least 30% more than its actual value. For the Aerotech acquisition, Diane supplied. James nodded grimly. Aerotech has offered $400 million contingent on verified financials and streamlined operations. Richard gets a 7-figure signing bonus if the deal closes, plus stock options in Aerotech. What about the board? I asked. Split. 5 members are fully complicit, including Matthews and Turner. 3 others, including Victoria, were kept partially in the dark. They knew about the acquisition talks, but not about the financial manipulation. We need to approach the 3 non-complicit board members, I decided. Victoria first, since she's already reached out. Carefully, James cautioned. Even the innocent board members stand to profit significantly from the acquisition. Self-interest is a powerful motivator. Our next step was legal consultation. Diane had a contact at Wilson and Blackmore, a law firm specializing in corporate malfeasance. She arranged a confidential meeting for the following morning. We need to understand exactly what laws are being broken and what whistleblower protections might apply, she explained. And we need documentation strategies that will hold up in court if necessary. While Diane handled legal angles, I reached out to Rachel. As my former assistant, she had access to marketing performance records that could prove the misrepresentation of our department's results. I can pull the actual campaign metrics, Rachel confirmed when I called her secure line. They haven't locked down the analytics platform yet since none of Richard's people know how to use it. Be careful, I warned. Download only what you can justify as part of your normal duties. Already thought of that, she replied. I always prepare weekly performance reports. No one will question me running the same reports I've done for 3 years. By evening, we had expanded our secure network to include 6 trusted current employees and 4 recently terminated executives. We created a secure cloud storage location for gathering evidence with access restricted to key team members. Victoria agreed to meet the following evening. I can only talk briefly, she said when I called. Things are moving quickly at the board level. How quickly, I asked, alarm rising. They've scheduled a special shareholder meeting in 2 weeks to approve the Aerotech acquisition. Richard's presenting updated financials to the board tomorrow for preliminary approval. This accelerated our timeline dramatically. We now had less than 2 weeks to gather evidence and determine our course of action before the acquisition would be formally approved. The next morning, Diane and I met with Catherine Wilson, a partner specializing in corporate law. After reviewing our evidence, her assessment was direct. You're describing multiple securities violations, she said gravely. Internal misrepresentation isn't technically illegal, but the moment they file these altered financials with the SEC for the acquisition, they've committed securities fraud. The emails discussing intentional misrepresentation demonstrate clear intent, which elevates potential penalties. What about wrongful termination? Diane asked. That's complicated, Catherine admitted. Washington is an at-will employment state. However, termination specifically to prevent discovery of fraud could constitute whistleblower retaliation, which is protected. The challenge is proving that was their motivation. The emails explicitly list Anna as primary target due to her oversight of marketing budgets, Diane pointed out. That's helpful, Catherine acknowledged. But to build a strong case, we need more documentation of the actual financial discrepancies, not just the intent to create them. This brought us back to James, who was working discreetly to document the alterations being made to financial statements. With his deputy director watching closely, this was extremely risky. I need access to the executive server, James told us during our next secure call. That's where they're storing the parallel financial records. I can't get to it without raising suspicions. This was where Victoria proved invaluable. As a board member, she had legitimate access to the executive server for review purposes. I can download the files, she confirmed when we met. But this crosses a line for me. I'll be actively participating in exposing fraud, not just providing information. The company you've served for years is about to be gutted, I reminded her. 400 employees will likely lose their jobs once Aerotech absorbs Luxe Tech. Is that the legacy you want? Her expression hardened with resolve. Tell me what you need. With Victoria's help, we obtained the modified financial statements being prepared for the acquisition. James spent an entire night comparing them against the actual financial records he had maintained as finance director. It's even worse than I thought, he reported, sending us his findings through our secure channel. They've overstated company value by nearly 40%. R&D failures worth millions have been completely hidden. They're claiming intellectual property valuations that are pure fiction. Meanwhile, Rachel and 2 other marketing team members had compiled comprehensive evidence showing the department's actual performance versus how it had been mischaracterized in Richard's reports to the board. By the end of the week, we had assembled a compelling evidence package documenting 1. Emails showing intent to misrepresent company financials. 2. Comparison of actual versus modified financial statements. 3. Documentation of the targeted removal of employees who might expose the fraud. 4. Board meeting minutes discussing the strategy. 5. Marketing performance data contradicting Richard's claims. 6. Testimonials from multiple terminated executives. 7. Timeline of events showing clear coordination. The question now was how to proceed. Catherine outlined our options. You can approach the SEC directly as whistleblowers, which provides certain protections but might take time to investigate. You can take the information to the non-complicit board members and try to force internal action. Or you can confront Richard and the involved board members directly with the evidence and attempt to negotiate. After lengthy discussion, we decided on a hybrid approach. First, we would secure official whistleblower status by filing a confidential report with the SEC. This would provide legal protection regardless of next steps. Then we would request an emergency meeting with the Ethics Committee of the board, comprised of 3 members, including Victoria, to present our findings. The most challenging part of our plan was determining how to approach this meeting. A straightforward presentation of evidence might prompt immediate legal countermeasures from Richard and his allies. We needed a strategy that would prevent them from simply dismissing our claims or burying them in lengthy litigation. We need leverage, I realized during our final planning session, something that forces immediate action rather than deliberation. The leverage came in unexpected form. My journalist contact, Michael Torres, called again. "I've been investigating Luxe Tech for 3 weeks," he revealed. "Before you were even terminated, I have sources suggesting financial irregularities related to the Aerotech acquisition talks." This changed the dynamic significantly. If Torres published his investigation, it would trigger immediate regulatory scrutiny, regardless of internal company actions. "I'm not asking you to be my source," Torres continued. "But if there's anything the public should know about what's happening at Luxe Tech, now would be the time to consider your options." After consulting with our legal counsel, I made a careful decision. I wouldn't provide Torres with our evidence directly, but I would confirm that his investigation was pursuing relevant concerns and that current leadership was implementing significant changes that warranted scrutiny. This gave us the leverage we needed. We could now approach the Ethics Committee with knowledge that external investigation was already underway, creating urgency for internal action. Victoria arranged the Emergency Ethics Committee meeting for Monday morning, exactly 10 days after my termination. Our preparation was meticulous, our documentation exhaustive, and our determination absolute. The night before the meeting, I reviewed everything one final time in my apartment. The bouquet that had trembled in my hands during my firing had become a symbol in my mind, representing not just my humiliation but my resolve. Richard Bennett had underestimated me, seeing only a department head to be disposed of, not recognizing the tenacity and integrity he was up against. Tomorrow would determine whether justice would prevail or whether corporate greed would once again go unchecked. I was ready. Monday morning arrived with steady Seattle rain that matched the gravity of the day ahead. I dressed in my most authoritative suit, a charcoal gray ensemble that projected confidence and professionalism. This time I brought no welcoming bouquet, only a leather portfolio containing evidence of corporate malfeasance. Diane James and I had agreed to arrive separately to avoid drawing attention. Catherine Wilson, our attorney, would join us at the building. The Ethics Committee meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the small conference room on the executive floor. As I approached the Luxe Tech building, a strange sense of displacement washed over me. Just 10 days ago, I had walked through these doors as a respected executive. Today, I returned as an outsider with security protocols potentially barring my entry. At the reception desk, the guard frowned at my arrival. "Miss Ward, you're no longer authorized for building access." "I have a meeting with the Ethics Committee," I replied calmly, having anticipated this obstacle. "Victoria Lancaster is expecting me." He checked his computer doubtfully. "I don't see any visitor authorization." "Please call Victoria directly," I insisted. "This is a scheduled meeting regarding a confidential ethics complaint." After a reluctant phone call, the guard grimaced and produced a visitor badge. "You'll need an escort to the 10th floor." "That won't be necessary." Thomas came Victoria's voice as she emerged from the elevator. "I'll take responsibility for Miss Ward." Victoria's appearance had transformed since our clandestine coffee shop meeting. Gone was the hesitant board member conflicted about company direction. Today she stood tall, her expression determined, and her voice carrying unmistakable authority. "The others have arrived," she informed me as we entered the elevator. Richard attempted to have the meeting canceled when he learned of it, but Ethics Committee protocols prevented his interference. "He's demanding to attend." "Is that a problem for our strategy?" I asked. "Quite the opposite," Victoria replied with grim satisfaction. "It saves us the trouble of presenting our findings twice." When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I was immediately struck by the changed atmosphere. Staff members hurried through hallways with tense expressions. Conversations halted as we passed, and several people did double takes at my presence. News of my return had clearly spread rapidly. Outside the conference room, Diane and James waited with Catherine. Their expressions reflected the mixture of tension and determination I felt myself. "Ready?" Diane asked softly. I nodded. More than ready. Inside the small conference room was already charged with tension. The three ethics committee members sat on one side of the table, Victoria Benjamin Harris and Margaret Chen. On the opposite side, Richard Bennett sat flanked by Gerald Matthews and Patricia Winters, his HR replacement for Diane. Richard's face darkened with anger when I entered. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, half rising from his chair. "This woman has no business in a confidential board committee meeting." "Miss Ward is here at my explicit invitation," Victoria replied coolly. "As the complainant in an ethics investigation, her presence is not only appropriate, but required." Complainant. What possible ethics complaint could a terminated employee file that warrants committee attention? Richard scoffed. Benjamin Harris, the committee chair, cleared his throat. "That's precisely what this meeting will determine, Mr. Bennett. Please be seated." Once everyone was settled, I distributed sealed packets to each committee member. What I'm presenting today is evidence of systematic financial misrepresentation, securities fraud in preparation, and targeted elimination of employees who might expose these activities. Richard laughed dismissively. "Preposterous. This is nothing but a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge for justified termination. I suggest you review the evidence before reaching conclusions, Mr. Bennett." Catherine interjected, her professional tone brooking no argument. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented our findings, starting with the altered financial statements and working through the documentation of intentional misrepresentation. James provided technical financial explanation where needed, while Diane addressed the pattern of targeted terminations. Richard's expression shifted gradually from dismissive anger to growing concern as the presentation continued. When I played recorded conversations provided by current employees documenting explicit instructions to modify financial reports, his face paled visibly. "These recordings were obtained illegally," he finally interrupted. "This entire presentation is based on confidential company information accessed without authorization." "On the contrary," Catherine responded, "all information was accessed by individuals with proper authorization during the normal course of their duties." The Ethics Committee should note that Mr. Bennett's concern appears to be about the access to information rather than denying its accuracy. Margaret Chen, who had been silently reviewing the documents with increasing alarm, finally spoke. "These disparities in financial reporting are significant. Mr. Bennett, can you explain why the R&D failures from the Phoenix project were reclassified as marketing expenses?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Accounting classifications are complex business decisions that consider multiple factors." "That doesn't answer the question," Benjamin Harris pressed. "These documents show a systematic pattern of reclassification that substantially alters the company's financial picture ahead of the Aerotech acquisition." "The Aerotech deal is a tremendous opportunity for Luxe Tech," Gerald Matthews interjected. "Some financial restructuring is normal in acquisition preparation." "Restructuring, yes. Misrepresentation, no," I countered, turning to a specific page in their packets. "This email explicitly discusses creating a parallel financial narrative to maximize acquisition value. That goes well beyond normal restructuring." As the committee members asked increasingly pointed questions, Richard's composure began to crack. When Margaret Chen inquired about the specific timing of my termination in relation to acquisition preparations, he finally lost control. "Of course we removed Ward first," he snapped. "Her position gave her visibility into the very adjustments necessary to make this deal happen. The marketing department was bleeding money while producing mediocre results, regardless of what her carefully curated metrics suggest." The room fell silent at this inadvertent admission. Richard seemed to realize his mistake immediately, his expression shifting to one of calculation. "What I mean," he backtracked, "is that normal business restructuring requires difficult personnel decisions." "I believe what you meant was quite clear, Mr. Bennett," Victoria said quietly, "as was your motive." Benjamin Harris closed his folder deliberately. I've seen enough to warrant immediate action. As Ethics Committee Chair, I'm calling for an emergency full board meeting this afternoon at 2 p.m. Miss Ward and her colleagues will present these findings to the entire board. In the meantime, Mr. Bennett, I'm requesting that you take no further company actions until this matter is resolved. This is absurd, Richard protested. You can't possibly give credence to these fabricated accusations. I'll have my legal team review this so-called evidence immediately. You're welcome to have legal representation at the board meeting, Harris replied evenly. In fact, I strongly advise it. Gerald is a named party in these allegations. You should recuse yourself from board deliberations on this matter. Matthews flushed angrily but said nothing. As the meeting adjourned, Richard pulled out his phone and began making urgent calls while striding from the room. Patricia Winters followed him, pointedly avoiding eye contact with Diane. In the hallway outside, James exhaled shakily. That went better than expected. It's not over, I cautioned. Richard has resources and connections. He'll fight back hard before the board meeting. Victoria joined us, her expression grave but satisfied. You should know that I've already briefed 4 other board members privately. They've reviewed preliminary evidence and are deeply concerned. Richard may have allies, but they're outnumbered. The hours before the full board meeting were tense. We relocated to a small conference room provided by Victoria to prepare our expanded presentation. Meanwhile, Richard was reportedly meeting with outside counsel and making continuous phone calls, presumably to Aerotech and his board allies. At precisely 2 p.m., we entered the main boardroom where the full board had assembled. Richard sat at one end with 2 attorneys beside him. The atmosphere was charged with tension and expectation. Board Chairman Ralph Turner attempted to establish control immediately. Before we begin, I want to state that these unsubstantiated allegations are damaging to company interests and the ongoing acquisition negotiations. With respect, Ralph Victoria interjected, characterizing evidence as unsubstantiated before it's presented demonstrates precisely the prejudgment that necessitated this emergency meeting. For the next hour, we presented our comprehensive evidence to the full board. The reaction was mixed, but trending increasingly toward concern as the presentation progressed. Even board members who had initially appeared skeptical began asking pointed questions about specific financial discrepancies. When we finished, Richard's attorneys presented a counter-argument claiming that all financial adjustments were standard practice for acquisition preparation and that our terminations were performance-based. Their presentation lacked the documentary evidence supporting ours, relying instead on technical arguments about business judgment and management prerogative. The decisive moment came when board member Lawrence Wilson asked Richard directly about the email discussing my removal as primary target due to my potential discovery of financial irregularities. Can you explain this specific language, Mr. Bennett? It strongly suggests Miss Ward was terminated not for performance but to prevent her from identifying financial misrepresentations. Richard's attempt to explain away the explicit language fell flat. As he fumbled through an unconvincing justification, I could see the remaining supportive board members growing increasingly uncomfortable. After both presentations concluded, the board moved to executive session, asking all non-board members to leave. We waited anxiously in a nearby conference room for over 2 hours while they deliberated. Finally, Victoria texted, "Decision made. Return to boardroom." When we re-entered, the board's composition had visibly shifted. Richard and Matthews were seated apart from the main group, their expressions tight with anger. Ralph Turner, looking significantly subdued, addressed us formally. After reviewing all evidence presented, the board has reached several determinations. First, Mr. Bennett has been placed on administrative leave pending full investigation of financial reporting practices. Second, an independent accounting firm will be engaged to audit all financial statements prepared for the Aerotech acquisition. Third, the board formally rescinds all terminations enacted by Mr. Bennett pending review of appropriate protocols. Richard stood abruptly. This is a catastrophic mistake. Aerotech will withdraw their offer when they learn of this circus. If their offer was predicated on misrepresented financials, Benjamin Harris replied calmly, then its withdrawal is appropriate and necessary. "You'll regret this," Richard said, gathering his papers. "All of you." As security arrived to escort Richard from the building, I experienced a moment of profound symmetry. 10 days earlier, I had been escorted out with my career in shambles, a bouquet trembling in my hands. Now Richard was receiving the same treatment, his carefully constructed scheme collapsing around him. The difference was, I had done nothing wrong. The weeks following Richard's removal were both challenging and transformative. The independent audit confirmed our allegations, identifying financial misrepresentations totaling nearly $60 million in inflated company value. The Aerotech acquisition was indeed withdrawn, though, as Benjamin Harris had noted, this was ultimately protective of Luxe Tech's legitimate interests and shareholders. Criminal investigations were opened against Richard and 3 board members, including Gerald Matthews, for attempted securities fraud. While these proceedings would take months to resolve, the immediate consequence was their permanent removal from Luxe Tech leadership. For those of us who had been wrongfully terminated, the board's formal apology came with offers of reinstatement, and in my case, promotion. I was invited to return as Chief Marketing Officer with expanded responsibilities and significant compensation adjustment. The decision whether to return wasn't straightforward. The experience had deeply shaken my trust in corporate leadership and governance. Part of me wanted to walk away completely, to find a smaller company with more transparent values and less complex politics. "You don't have to decide immediately," Diane advised when we discussed our options over coffee. She had been offered the position of Executive Vice President of Human Resources. "Take time to consider what you really want." What I wanted, I realized after much reflection, was the opportunity to help reshape Luxe Tech into the company I had always believed it could be. The board was receptive to significant structural reforms, including an enhanced ethics oversight committee with real enforcement power and a whistleblower protection program that Diane was designing. "If we walk away, we leave space for the next Richard Bennett," I told James when he questioned my decision to return. "Someone needs to rebuild with integrity." My first day back at Luxe Tech felt surreal. Employees applauded spontaneously when I walked through the marketing department. Rachel had tears in her eyes as she hugged me, whispering, "You did it. You actually did it." The transition wasn't without challenges. Trust had been broken at multiple levels of the organization. Some employees remained fearful of speaking up, conditioned by Richard's brief but damaging tenure. Others had formed factions during the turmoil with lingering resentments and suspicions. Rebuilding required both structural and cultural changes. Working with Diane and James, who had been promoted to CFO, we implemented a comprehensive transformation plan. 1. Complete financial transparency with quarterly reviews accessible to all department heads. 2. A robust whistleblower protection policy with anonymous reporting options. 3. Ethics training for all employees with special emphasis for executives. 4. Restructured board oversight with term limits and mandatory ethics compliance. 5. Regular town halls where difficult questions were encouraged, not punished. Perhaps most significantly, I established a mentorship program for younger employees focusing on ethical leadership and moral courage. My experience had taught me that technical skills alone weren't enough. Professionals needed the fortitude to stand up for what was right, even when doing so carried personal risk. The hardest moment wasn't being fired, I told a group of emerging leaders during our first mentorship session. It was deciding to fight back when it would have been easier to simply move on. Ethical choices rarely feel like dramatic moments of heroism. They're quiet decisions to do the difficult right thing instead of the convenient wrong one. 6 months after Richard's removal, Luxe Tech hosted an industry conference on corporate ethics and transparency. The company that had nearly fallen victim to fraud was now positioning itself as a leader in ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the transformation was genuine and increasingly recognized. During my keynote address at the conference, I reflected on the experience that had transformed both the company and me personally. When I stood in that boardroom with a bouquet trembling in my hands, hearing that my time was over, I felt like a failure. What I couldn't see in that moment was that it was actually the beginning, not the end. Sometimes our greatest growth comes disguised as our worst defeats. The professional lessons were clear. Document everything. Build genuine alliances based on shared values. Understand the financial underpinnings of your organization. And never stop asking questions when things don't add up. But the personal lessons went deeper. I learned that my identity wasn't defined by my title or position. Being suddenly stripped of professional status had forced me to reconnect with my core values and inner strength. The humiliation of public firing had eventually led to greater resilience and clearer purpose. Most importantly, I discovered that integrity isn't just a personal virtue but a collective responsibility. When we stand against wrongdoing, we rarely stand alone for long. The allies who had risked their own positions to help expose the truth had demonstrated that courage is contagious. 1 year after Richard's disastrous first day, Luxe Tech was stronger than ever. Without the artificial inflation and short-term focus on acquisition value, we had built sustainable growth based on genuine innovation and market responsiveness. Our stock value reflected real performance rather than accounting manipulation, and employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. The bouquet that had trembled in my hands that day had long since wilted and been discarded. But occasionally, when making difficult decisions in my new role, I would remember that moment of vulnerability and the strength that grew from it. It served as a personal reminder that our worst moments can become catalysts for our greatest triumphs if we face them with integrity and courage. The experience had taught me that true success isn't measured by titles or compensation, but by the courage to stand for what's right even when standing alone. It taught me that seemingly final endings can become unexpected beginnings. Most of all, it showed me that when we remain true to our values, we find not only professional vindication but personal transformation. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything seemed lost, only to discover it was actually the beginning of something better? I'd love to hear your stories of professional challenges and how you overcame them. Please leave a comment below sharing your experience. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to hear more stories of workplace challenges and triumphs. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you found value in it, and share it with anyone navigating difficult professional situations. Thank you for joining me on this journey from devastation to vindication. Remember, sometimes when one door closes abruptly, it's not the end of your story but the beginning of a better chapter.